Well, there we go. Recording in progress. And I know we're going to be heading to Facebook soon, preparing a live stream. And now we're on Facebook. Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to History Matters and So Does Coffee. Today we're talking about, surprise, something that happened in the last few days. There's never a loss of topics. The question is which one will work well in our wonderful little format here. And I found one. And it's going to have to do with someone being essentially gagged. Not really, but we'll talk about that in the house last week. But before I do anything like that, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really ready to dig into this topic. So the way this works, if you are joining us through Facebook or here on Zoom, you can continue to chat amongst yourselves. But if you have questions specific to this week's topic, we ask that you put those in the Q&A. I'll be back in about 30 minutes, and we will have a discussion. See you in a little bit.
Perfect. And I will also say, as we say every week, if any of you are here for the first time, please say so in chat because you will get I always say robust, this time I'll say rousing welcome from the wonderful History Matters community. I'm covering up chat, so I have no idea if this is the 120-something straight episode. Because I'm a historian, I don't remember dates, numbers, names. At any rate, we've been here for a long time. So it's a great community. Let folks know you're here. Okay, now today's topic came from something which, not surprisingly, given my interest in congressional doings generally and in congressional misbehavior, let's call it, specifically, caught my attention. And it happened this past week to Representative Jim McGovern in the House. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to lay out the situation before plunging into it. And I'm actually going to read what he said and what others said more than I might typically do because the specific words used in this case matter. They're part of the point. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications of what happened after these words were spoken. So a little bit more detail here. So apparently the House was debating something about digital cryptocurrency legislation, which I can tell you absolutely nothing about. And Representative Jim McGovern, who apparently is the top Democrat on the House Rules Committee, accused House Republicans of pandering to their most extreme members and preventing anything from getting done. And he said then a, quote, stunning indictment of their inability to get anything done. He referred to the trials and the fact that Republicans keep going to New York to stand and make points about the trial in front of the courthouse in New York. So he said, speaking of, I'm going to go right back. He said that the pandering was a stunning indictment of their ability to get anything done. They weren't getting anything done. Then he said, speaking of indictments, Republicans are skipping their real jobs to take day trips to New York to try to undermine Trump's criminal trial. He mentioned what we've all seen, which is that some of the Republicans, at least on one day, I think more than one, were wearing kind of matching suits with red ties, that they seem to have come in a uniform. And he said that maybe wearing the uniforms was, quote, because maybe they want to distract from the fact that their candidate for president has been indicted more times than he's been elected. Maybe they don't want to talk about the fact that the leader of their party is on trial for covering up hush money payments to a porn star for political gain, not to mention 3 other criminal felony prosecutions he's facing. Now, at this point, Republican Jerry Carl of Alabama, who's presiding over the House at that point, reminded members to restrain from personal attacks on, quote, presumed nominees for the office of the president. And I'm highlighting that because I'm going to come back to that point. Refrain from personal attacks. McGovern said he was only stating facts. That former President Trump was indicted by a grand jury and he was on trial in a court of law, and then asked, is it unparliamentary to state a fact on the House floor? Okay, so then Jerry Carl, presiding, said, well, he's not in a position to determine what is true and what isn't true. Okay. McGovern said, a Republican called the trial a sham last week. Was that not a problem? So, and then McGovern, and here, like, he was ready. He pulled out the House rule book, apparently. And the House rule book, actually, guys, I'm sorry, I take this back. He wasn't ready. I think Carl is the guy who pulled out the rule book and says that you're not supposed to speak irreverently or seditiously against the king. Either way, the parliamentary rule book, which I'm also going to come back to, does say no personalities allowed. Come back to that point shortly. It also says, in referring to where precedents come from, that you're not supposed to speak irreverently or seditiously against the king, which then became translated into abuse, innuendo, or ridicule of the president, and perhaps presumptive major presidential nominees are included. Now I get back to McGovern. I know you're trying to do your job and follow precedent, but frankly, at some point, it's time for this body to recognize that there is no precedent for this situation. We have a presumptive nominee for president facing 88 felony counts, and we're being prevented from even acknowledging it. And then he listed the trials. Republican Erin Houchin, I hope I'm saying her name right, of Indiana, said, take down his words. McGovern sat. At this point, the House parliamentarian staff and Representative Carl spent an hour trying to figure out if McGovern's words broke any rules while the House just sat there. It was decided that you cannot refer to a presidential candidate, a presumed candidate, in terms that are personally offensive. And McGovern was blocked from speaking for the rest of the day. And what he said was erased from the record. Okay. Now, obviously, that caught my attention because seemingly he was stating facts. And, take down his words is a way of, usually happens when someone says something really insulting or bad, right? Take down his words, which stops debate instantly. And then you have to deal with what was said and should it have been said and what happens next. That's what happened here. But the take down his words was interesting given what was said. And McGovern made that point, right? Said, well, someone called the trial a sham last week. Why is that okay? And this isn't okay. So I did a few things, even before I knew this was going to be the topic, because I was just curious. So I went to the current congressional record, which is online. And I thought, so how often does something like this happen? And I will say right up front, I did not do long, extended research. I was not being, amazing ace historian spending a few hours to have conclusive assumptions, conclusive facts born of reading the record. But I did spend a little while searching around for keywords to see what would come up in cases similar to this one. Now, what I did see, and I only looked for I don't know, a couple of weeks, maybe, I just looked in, I think, May and maybe a little in April. And again, not systematically, just looking around. There were a good number of times when whoever was presiding over the House or the Speaker said something along the lines of, I asked the member to refrain from making personal commentary or making personalities against a fellow member, against the current president. That happened a good number of times, right? And that's actually typical. And I didn't know before doing my research this morning that moment had actually happened here when the person presiding over the House said to McGovern, I ask members to refrain from making personal comments about, in this case, the presumed Republican nominee for president. That's actually very typical. And normally, when you look at the record, that's where it stops. End. In this case, though, the one member said, take down the words. And that's what started this off, right? So take down the words actually means, regardless of what anyone thinks about those words, everything stops. It begins a process, which I referred to already with the House parliamentarian. Sometime I'd love to sit down with the current House parliamentarian, just because wouldn't that be interesting? Just to find out what that's like to serve in that position. But at any rate, the parliamentarian, the speaker, or the person presiding, various other staff members then have to decide You know, are rules broken? Were rules broken? If they're broken, what happens? So that also, once you've said that, you've started the process. There are all kinds of processes that you can start in Congress by throwing out, you know, a word. I demand last question, or, you know, previous question. I'm sorry, previous question. There are ways in which you can create holes in debate. There are ways in which you can halt debate. There are all kinds of things that you can do that start off a process. And in my book, I talk about how in the 19th century, people use these parliamentary maneuvers all the time, and they still do today, right? To say what they want to say, to prevent people from saying what they don't want to be said. All of that is typical. All of that is congressional. In one way or another, that's parliamentary, unless someone convincingly says it's unparliamentary. So at any rate, things are going along swimmingly and typically, and then someone says, I want those words written down, which starts this process. That happens a lot less often. Also happening a lot less often than please stop making personalities. Words get erased from the record. And I'm going to come back to that point because I don't think that in this kind of situation that necessarily always works to the benefit of those demanding that they be erased. Now, what you're not supposed to say in Congress, I've been using the word personalities. That would have been the word they used at the time for personal comments, insults, in current usage, snark, particularly about current members, but also about the President of the United States. I think in a conversation that I did with Heather Cox Richardson on Instagram in the last week or so, I mentioned an instance where someone called William Henry Harrison a name and was called to order for it. And he stood up kind of like McGovern here and said, hey, last week or a little while back, someone called Martin Van Buren a jackass. And no one said anything about that. So that moment is actually in its way typical too. When someone gets called for making a personality and someone else says, I can name 5 other personalities. Why are you picking on me? And that's typical too, in that whoever's presiding and whoever has a majority in the chamber can not out and out warp, but can tweak the way things are applied. Rules are applied, who gets objected to, who doesn't. I talk about that a lot in my book as well. And again, that's congressional parliamentary behavior, that you know, the person presiding over the House, the speaker or whoever is presiding, can't be blatantly, corruptly biased in, like, I will only allow Republicans to speak, but they can lean, and they often do lean. They're supposedly, they don't want to affect the what do I want to call it? The reputation of the body, the fact that the body is a functioning institution, that people can rely on it to some degree, you know, that it isn't totally surrendered to partisanship. I'm not going to stop here because we could stop here in many ways. But basically, it's always been the case that speakers kind of can warp things, but not to a degree that people actually will then step back and say, I'm out. I've lost faith generally in Congress, totally. They want to get something done. Congress has to be functioning somehow. But at any rate, personalities, someone calling people to order for personalities, all of that happens. Personalities being attacked by whoever's presiding on one side and not the other, and having that be different over time, that happens too. The case that instantly comes to mind when you're thinking about this whole episode, and some of you may already have thought of it, is John Quincy Adams in the House and the gag rule. And the gag rule was explicitly, you know, it was a gag. What happened to McGovern was a procedure put into place and then debated. In the case of John Quincy Adams, it was something different. It was passed in the House, and John Quincy Adams went back to the House after his presidency, which I always think is kind of admirable. And he wanted to stab at slavery. And so the gag rule was passed, not because of him, 1836. The gag rule was passed so that petitions, anti-slavery petitions, would be kept off the floor. Basically, that's what it did. It said all these petitions, all of this arguing about slavery, it's not going to happen. We're gonna lay it on the table, right? So they didn't say, well, we will never consider this. They said, we're just going to put these things aside. Actually, The first resolution that created a gag rule said this: all petitions, memorials, resolutions, propositions, or papers relating in any way or to any extent whatever to the subject of slavery, think about how comprehensive that is, shall without being printed or referred be laid upon the table, and then no further action whatever be taken thereon. Okay, all petitions, memorials, resolutions, propositions, or papers relating in any way to slavery laid upon the table. 1836 is a resolution, and they keep every new Congress passing resolutions until they finally actually make a rule. So Adams keeps forcing that gag again and again and again. He brings a petition that's not supposed to be brought. He mentions something during just a roll call vote again and again and again and again. He highlighted the fact that he wanted to say something and he was being gagged, and he became tricky. You know, I think at one point he presented a petition that was, I think, allegedly from people defending slavery, and he was told that couldn't happen at all, and he was like, "Oh, really? Interesting." He was very much using the gag as a means of getting publicity for the fact that there was a gag and for the topic which was being gagged. And very famously, he said at one point, "Am I gagged or am I not?" Right there, keep shutting me up. Am I gagged or am I not? Because if you're aggressively silencing someone again and again and again, people will notice. And this was what John Quincy Adams knew and did. He knew and could see that Americans, particularly in the North, some of them were upset by slavery. Many of them were not particularly moved to do anything against slavery. However, Americans would get very riled up if they felt that their right of petition, their right to full representation, the freedom of debate was being challenged. They would care about their rights way more than they would care about slavery, he assumed. And he was right, because the Northern public began to have rallies and to talk about the fact that their right of petition was being violated, and that petitioning meant much more in the 19th century than it does now. So Adams, very smartly, very intelligently, by showing again and again and again that he was gagged, made the point, advertised the fact that he was being prevented from speaking. His constituency and Northern constituencies were being prevented from being represented on the floor. Their right of petition was being cut off. And it caused ultimately so much of a fuss, rallies and banners, that ultimately in 1844, the gag rule was defeated. Okay, I thought of this in relation to what's going on now, because what happened, and I know nothing about why Representative Houchin said, "I want his words taken down." I don't know if she just was impatient because McGovern was veering off the topic of what was supposed to be talked about. I don't know. I don't know the logic behind what she did. But the fact of the matter is, if you demand that someone's words be taken down, and you do it in a way that is at all questionable, you at least open the door towards calling more attention to those words. And I've argued any number of times here on History Matters, words really matter. They really matter. Precise wording, who says them, the tone that they're in, the way that we read them, the way that we emotionally respond to them. Words matter so much in so many ways. So if someone says, "I don't like those words," we have to talk about those words. Potentially, then that becomes a moment that might attract publicity. And in this case, of course, it did. Right? Because none of us would know that this had happened if there hadn't been like an hour pause. And McGovern, of course, then went on social media and said, "This just happened and I'm not allowed to speak for the rest of the day." And I just stated a fact. So suddenly, it became a more partisan issue that he just was stating facts. This guy's up for this many indictments and he's been indicted more than he's been elected and blah, blah, blah. They're facts. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. And the fact that those were jumped on by some Republicans in the House then became an issue that could be highlighted, debated. Why am I not allowed to say the truth? That means that truth, that fact, is now going to be more in the open. So there's a big oops factor if you call attention to things during debate in a way that is not, let's just say, strategic, without fully thinking about the implications of what you're doing. This was an oops moment, I think, because now that simple statement about Trump's trials, and importantly, the fact that the Republican majority in the House decided that the statement about Trump's trials cannot be said in the House and was erased from the record. Okay, that fact too, that's significant, if only because it advertises the fact that one side, one party appears to be shutting down the ability of the other party to, in this case, pretty much just state the truth. It suggests what someone called, in the context of my reading this morning, congressional tyranny, right? You're not allowed to say bad things about, as McGovern said repeatedly, presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump. Hey, we're not allowed to criticize him. And actually, I'm not criticizing him. We're not allowed to state facts that the Republicans don't like here on the floor. Really? You're gonna, and now McGovern kind of knew what he was doing. And apparently when he was called to order in that way and he sat down, he had a little bit of a smirk on his face, like, really? We're gonna do this now? And as I suggested in my reading of it, did say once it was ruled that the words would be erased, like, really? Those are facts, not my opinion. They're facts. We're going to do this here. So that moment got publicity. That moment had implications, right? Because it suggests that at least in some ways, Republicans are silencing, stifling criticism of Donald Trump or of their party. I don't know, but it opens all of these implications about what is or isn't allowed to be said in the House by Republicans, regardless of how we want to analyze that. We certainly could, but the simple fact that this happened then has a lot of implications for what the Republican majority is doing in the House and what that suggests about the Democratic minority and what that suggests about the Republicans in this moment and ways in which they're reaching for power. So my larger point here is, in the end, it's a relatively minor moment, right? And as I said, there are good, even in just the few weeks that I looked in the congressional record, the current congressional record, I remind the member to not make personal comments about ... If you find the congressional record and you look for, I can't remember whether I looked for personal comments or personalities. I can't remember what I looked for, but you could do that yourself and see how often that appears. Not constantly, but every couple of days, maybe someone would say something that sounds mean about President Biden, and somebody else, whoever's presiding, would say, I remind people to not use personalities or to make personal insults against whatever. That's typical. And as with so much else at this time in politics, of course, the person making the comments has made the comments. They're in the record. People heard. And when someone then says, you're not supposed to do that, and you just go marching on, the words have been spoken. We see that a lot today too, right? Where people who shall go nameless say something really offensive or outlandish, and then when they're called on it, they say, oh, it was a joke. I didn't mean it. The words are out there. We've heard the words. The words have had an impact. You can walk them back, but the words are out there. So in this case, minor as it is, think about all of the implications that it just opens the door to. And it's entirely possible that this will not be mentioned again. This will not have any significance after this point, but it opens the door for Democrats to complain about being stifled, being silenced, about Republican tyranny, whatever. It opens the door to a partisan debate that door is a little more closed before this point. No procedure, let me put it this way, no congressional procedure is just a procedure when it's used either haphazardly or aggressively or strategically in a way that's obvious. So that's my larger point, is that there are many things that are happening right now that seem haphazard, that perhaps are possibly trivial, but that can be significant publicity wise, as in a partisan kind of a way, in a setting precedents kind of a way, in an opening a I don't want to even say debate, argument kind of way, in getting public outcry. All of these things are possible from something like this moment, or even something more smaller, depending on how it's used. As ever, I always say to keep your eyes open, particularly when words are spoken and then attacked and either defended or taken back. Right. And I'll just mention, the obvious one. I can't see chat when I have my notes up here. But former President Trump sent out some kind of a video that talked about a united Reich, right? And left it up for a day on social media and then ultimately took it down, right? Oh, no. Some aide put it up there and it's gone now. Well, it was up and it was left up and it made a point. And again, people are talking about that point in all kinds of ways. The word was up for a day. The word was taken down. It's a highly significant word. It had its impact. Same thing, as I said, for jokes. You make a joke, it's an offensive joke. You make a comment, it's a crazy comment. You then say, oh, no, joking. The words are out there doing their thing. Okay, I'm just bumping up against the edge here. So this is a multi-lesson History Matters episode about words matter, about small incidents, particularly in Congress, but generally being able to be used for publicity, to make political points, to make partisan points, being clues, important sort of that sort of pointing finger that they used a lot in the 18th and 19th century, important moments that people can point at as far as looking at the implications of what's happening. They can be way more important than they seem to be. So don't assume that seemingly trivial things are entirely trivial. Just keep your eyes open. Think about the implications. Be a historian, right? Think about what happens, think about its context, and then think about the potential implications. Don't heap meaning on things that don't necessarily need it, but don't assume a lack of meaning either. Be a historian. Think about context and implications and observe. More important, observe and watch the words. Okay, I will now stop. Thank you, Tom. I did not have enough coffee this morning. Now am I not muted?
Okay, yeah, you were muted. I thought it was I thought I did something
Oh,
wrong.
no. I don't know why that happened.
That was weird.
That's totally weird. You heard everything until
Until you said you turned to get the mug, and then right then I was turning my audio on and I thought I messed the whole thing up.
Okay, thank you someone for telling me.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was, as I say every week, those of you who have not been here before, that every week for whatever it is, 220 or 21 or 20, whatever it is, for a lot of
217.
217. Thank you, Carolee. I have had a mug that in some way ties to the theme of what we're talking about. This mug I have used before. Oh, and what I said when I was muted was, and I haven't had enough coffee this morning. But anyway, I've used this before, but it just seemed, yeah, that's right. I was gagged. I gagged myself.
That's a good one.
That's hilarious.
Jim is quick.
That I didn't do it on purpose. Anyway, the mug, it was a gift mug, and as ever, I don't ever remember details, but I did not buy this for myself. And maybe whoever did send it to me can speak up. It says, funny, I don't recall asking for your opinion.
I love that whole series, whoever makes those. They make me laugh so hard.
Yeah, it was like just perfect for today. Of course, McGovern would say, it wasn't my opinion.
That's so funny.
But anyway,
I
more
went to
than
the back
ever.
of the mug cabinet and I have when you got your award last year.
Oh,
And
I
then on the
love that
back,
mug.
Carolee put Annie Evans. This is so funny. History Matters partner in crime, #1 Springsteen fan, the Kevin Bacon of history.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's
I
so
love that mug.
funny.
And I glanced at that mug when I was looking around in my panicked Friday morning, what mug will I use moment. This took me a nanosecond. I
That is
saw
a
this and
great
I was like,
mug.
yeah, okay.
Did
Um,
anybody say who
do
gave
we
it to
know
you? I don't
who gave
see.
this to me? Uh, anyway, maybe someone
Maybe
will.
somebody will watch it in the archives and put it in the comments.
Yes, exactly. Oh, we don't, there's no access to the mug spreadsheet right now. Okay, well, if someone
Oh.
finds it out, I will say something either on some form of social media or next week in next week's episode. Okay, now we can open things up for questions.
Yeah, we were there. The chat was crazy today. It was funny. Part of it was talking about what you're talking about, and then it also evolved into a whole discussion about how everybody apparently sees something different on their screen when we're talking,
Oh,
and also the chat configuration. So it's kind of weird.
okay.
So we also had a little technology
A technology moment.
behind the scenes moment. But it was funny because right before you logged in today, Jessica was telling us about chaperoning her son's trip and all the wacky, things that come with that with middle school children. And then when you were talking about people making personal comments in
Oh,
Congress, all I could think about was the whole false eyelashes nonsense this week.
yes.
All I could think about was the 7th graders on that bus with Jessica or on that airplane with Jessica probably had more decorum than some of our sitting members of Congress. And how sad that is, a commentary on the state of our nation. That's all I could think about as a middle school teacher. So,
And we can talk about that moment too.
ooh,
That was the main point of the Instagram conversation I
yeah,
had with Heather,
yeah,
was that exchange in committee. And again, that was about personalities. Same idea, right?
yeah.
Is that Marjorie Taylor Greene said something about Jasmine Crockett's false eyelashes, and then she did something along the lines of what, the person about Van Buren and William Henry Harrison, McGovern did, right? Well, wait a minute. If that person said this, can I say this or can I
Right.
not say this? Really, it's like, is this partisan or am I allowed to do what that person just did? Which is instantly what happens when you get into this kind of moment. I don't know if you haven't seen the footage of that moment. It's worth looking at it to see the facial expression of Jamie Raskin
Yeah.
behind them. He basically, he's like just sitting there and then suddenly he goes,
And I'm wondering if in the back of his head, if he's thinking, this is how my kids acted when they were in middle school.
it could be. That was also a case of personalities, right?
Yeah.
Being like, really, are you going to use them or not use them? Now, someone made, we talked about this, like, and we talked about, Heather and I talked about how it was gendered, obviously, that, what they were tossing out with each other was gendered, but also that some of the response was gendered, cat fight, blah, blah, blah. And someone made the point that actually Marjorie Taylor Greene's comment also had a racial component because she was attacking the fact that many Black women wear false eyelashes, like very large false eyelashes, as a fashion statement, and that had that kind of racial component to it too. Very well could be, I would say. But at any rate, another personalities moment this week that then, of course, got all kinds of attention. And of course, people used that moment to play up the publicity and make the point that they wanted to make. And it said something about Congress. And as you just suggested, Annie, how are they behaving there in Congress? Someone said online somewhere, like, we moved into Joanne Freeman territory. Like, yes, indeed. If a member of Congress behaves badly, somehow. But at any rate, let me stop talking.
Well,
and see
Joanne,
if we can.
we also decided you were going to have a new reality show where we just watch you go through archives and talk to yourself about the cool stuff you're finding. And every once in a while, a Yale kid could be in there with you.
I do.
We would
I
watch it.
actually really do go, oh. I talk to myself. I get very excited by the things I find. I cut and paste things all over the place. And yeah.
We're going to pitch that idea to PBS.
A researcher at work who talks to herself.
Yeah.
I always do.
Okay. We
okay.
do have questions in the Q&A.
Okay, that would be good.
We might want to get to them. Okay. Our good buddy Dave asks, while striking the words is a problem, facts don't matter, and it's a threat to our democracy. A much bigger problem is, he said, Marjorie Taylor Greene on Twitter saying Biden's Department of Justice and FBI were planning to assassinate Trump while executing a search warrant in Florida. Representative Gosar and Fox spread a lie. It seems incredibly dangerous. He wants to know your thoughts on that when members of Congress spread those sorts of lies.
And it is dangerous, and it is irresponsible, and it is a lie, right? So I'll state that right at the outset. Irresponsible, dangerous, and a lie. And falls into the logic of what I was just talking about, right? The words are out there. She could, I'm sure she won't, but she could step forward and say, oh, my bad, right? I guess I was wrong. She won't. Even if she did, the words are out there. And people who want to hear those words or are susceptible to the logic of those words, they own it now. They have it. It's out there, and it will be used. Another example of how personalities, words being thrown around can have a big impact. That's just dangerous. That's just, we can think back of other examples, but that goes beyond some of the other examples to lie like that. I mean, just to lie blatantly like that. It's such a lie. I won't go on to talk about it, but same logic as what I just talked about. It's true. I would say that's not quite a personality. That's just a lie, but it's a dangerous one. And as I said, the words are out there. We're aware of them, right? We know that was said, and there will be people who heard that said who will believe that. And what that means, I don't know, but it's not good in this particular moment in time. With some people really seemingly encouraging violence against the other side, suggesting, in any number of ways, silencing, tamping down, attacking the enemy. It's dangerous.
We also had quite a little discussion in the chat while you were talking about parliamentary procedure. So Dale has a question. He says, assuming that the parliamentarian is nonpartisan, how much pressure can the party that's in power place on that parliamentarian?
Repeat the question for me.
He said, assuming that the parliamentarian is nonpartisan, how much pressure could the party that's currently in power put on that person, on the parliamentarian?
Oh, well, there can be pressure put on that person. But that person actually does have a job. And I mean, again, I know nothing about the current parliamentarian. I do know that Benjamin Brown French, who was the clerk of the House and a clerk of the House for a long time, and he did that job for so long that he was considered an expert on parliamentary rules. He was constantly asked about the rules and how they should be applied, and he had very strong political feelings. Particularly later in his life, but he really wanted to seriously understand how the rules were taken. So I'm sure that could be highly partisan. I couldn't tell you anything about when or how it is, and I don't want to throw blame that way, but you're totally right, I suppose. Generally speaking, that's something you would want to think about and investigate. I did want to make a point here. Dave said Marjorie Taylor Greene's lie was amplified on Fox and elsewhere. Can the House not gag or censure her? Well, the House can do that with words spoken on the floor. That and that's always been a place where this issue of what can and can't be spoken obviously is huge. It's an important issue. Privilege of debate, the idea that you can say things in debate that you can't be held responsible for elsewhere. You know, like you're protected by privilege of debate. And that's another term. If you want to go to a congressional record and search for privilege or privileges of debate, sometimes members of Congress say something and sort of hide behind that fact. Well, I have privilege of debate. You can't hold me responsible for this. And that's ideally so that there can be free and open debate, but obviously, given everything that we're talking about right now, can be used in a bad way too. But everything I've talked about as far as, you know, gag rules and such actually has to do with what's said on the floor, where words have a special status. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Dale, who just put up a link about the House parliamentarian.
Oh,
And yes, I don't know who LS is. Do you, under
I,
Dale? Oh, Linda Shalish
yeah, Linda.
Makes a good point, right? Saying things like that is dangerous because it gives Trump and people in positions of power the excuse to act on it, right? And say it's a legitimate threat. It throws out a potential base for seemingly logical actions, even though they're based on nothingness. So yeah.
Yeah, we have two
I've been,
Lindas.
I'm sorry.
Linda said that was her. We said we do have two Lindas. She did say that was her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure we have lots of people with it. Oh, there she is. Yes, that's me. At any rate, you know, I've been screaming for years, like when Trump was running for the presidency for the first time, about words and how they matter even when they're taken back, and that words from people in power matter more. I said that on, I believe, BBC Newsnight. And there was a member of the Trump administration opposite me, and she said, you know, presidential words don't matter more than any other words. Words don't matter. And right. Thank you, Annie, for the proper facial expression. They wouldn't let me talk, and I was having conniption fits. And you can hear, when you find the clip, me in the background going, they gagged me. I think I did finally get to say, no, presidential words actually matter more than other words, and words do matter. But at any rate.
Yeah. That makes me think of, Joanne, the comment that I think it was even before the election when they had Trump in the Access Hollywood video when he said he would grab women by a certain body part. And the next week we had a seventh grader. I was still in the schools then. And he made a comment about a girl's body part, the exact same body part. And so he got sent to the office. And I just happened to be walking through the office, and I knew this young man. And he was kind of a frequent flyer in the office, if you know what I mean. And I was like, why are you here? And he told me, and he looked at me right in the eye, Joanne, I'll never forget this. He said, all I did was say something about, and he repeated what he had said. He goes, and that guy running for president said it. If he's allowed to say it, why can't I? And in my head, all I thought was, this is going to be.
Wow. Well, that's logical,
and
right?
I thought at the time only for a few months, not knowing it would be the next 4 years, right? Like kids are hearing this and they're thinking, well, if the president can say that, I can get away with it in my math class or my gym class or.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We have more questions. Bailey, who's been with us for a long time. Good to see you, Bailey. This is a long question, so I'm going to try and unpack this one. You said the early republic basically replaced king with president, for whom one couldn't personally attack on the House floor. Was that the only major change, or were there other pre-revolutionary policies about gags that came over from parliament or colonial legislatures that got changed? She asked because she wondered if there were restrictions that the king had that the founding generation might have thought were too restrictive, but she didn't know if that was the case.
Okay, so I can answer this in a broad kind of way, but I would actually need to look at the manual to answer it very specifically. But let me give you the context of the manual. So the background of that question, yes. So the United States inherited all kinds of rules and standards and had to figure out, like, you know, how the king was treated versus how a president was treated, and they did not not only did they not necessarily assume that that was the same thing, but sometimes the simple fact that something was applied to the king made them think maybe this shouldn't be applied to a president. When Jefferson was vice president, he worked on a parliamentary manual. He's vice president, so he's presiding over the Senate. And being Thomas Jefferson, he looked at all the precedents. He made rules that applied to the United States. And I believe you can find copies of Jefferson's parliamentary manual that have all of this stuff in there. That manual that he created, which says things like no personalities, et cetera, he wrote it for the Senate. Ultimately, it was adopted by the House, and some form of it was and I believe still is in place with a lot of amendments and additions. So that would be the way to look, because and I haven't looked at the Jefferson Parliamentary Manual for a long time. You could find it online, I'm sure. And I think if you looked up Jefferson Parliamentary Manual, that's what you will get. You could see, because it's Jefferson, so he's like footnoting all over the place and doing what you had to do in the early republic, regardless of if you're Thomas Jefferson. And that is, okay, what are we going to do now? How will we do it differently from what's been done before, given that we're a democratic republic? I will figure this out, and I will put it in the manual, and then it'll be written down, and then people can use it in the future. There was a lot of deliberate precedent setting, as well as precedent setting, that had to take place because, as Bailey suggested at the outset, at the start, with this question, king and president are not the same, but they were assumed to be somehow on the same planet. And so you had to figure out, how do you have for a president the gravitas required without the monarchical implications of that gravitas?
Now I feel like we need to have the George Washington and the King character from Hamilton have a discussion about this and film it for kids to explain the difference. and then to explain to them why it doesn't matter what side of the pond you're on. If Francesca can help me out with this, you still shouldn't be acting like a 7th grader when you're holding that high of an office. It's not okay.
Yeah, you could do that. You could have a king and a Washington figure, and the king saying, well, you can't say that about me. And the president saying, well, yeah, you can't.
All right. Our good buddy Dave has a couple more great questions in the queue. And if anybody else wants to add one, we've got maybe time for more than 2. He asked, any thoughts about Speaker Johnson saying the court cases versus Trump are not legitimate, which undermines the rule of law? Is there any historical precedent for a speaker or member of Congress literally undermining the rule of law?
Yeah. So there are many ways in which that stands out. And the one, I guess, at the top of my list of things that are wrong with that situation is the Speaker of the House declaring, like, attacking basically the actual functioning of the rule of law, right? And the Speaker, so not even like a more typical member of Congress, the Speaker of the House suggesting, and so have many of the people who have been going with their red ties and suits outside the courthouse, doing the same thing, right? Sham trial, a sham trial. It's corrupt. It shouldn't be happening. I'm going to attack the jurors. I'm going to attack the judge. In one way or another, they're attacking the rule of law. They're attacking the idea, because what's happening is there's a trial. You might not like the trial. You might really want the outcome to be one way or another with the trial. What we're trying for is a fair trial. And we don't know, people saying, no, he's innocent. Well, guess what the trial's for? To have a jury of American citizens picked and approved by both sides debate and figure out what they think the verdict should be. That's our system of justice. If you are talking about an ongoing trial with a former president of the United States and just going out of your way to denounce it, to attack the jurors, and do other things that, in and of themselves are bizarrely irresponsible. It's why Trump is not allowed to do those things, and why these people are, as he used, the word surrogates for him. But that all by itself, the speaker attacking the rule of law in that way is shocking. And that someone in his position is doing that shocking. But you know, I will say this in a general kind of a way. Just think about the many ways in which there are some Republicans right now who are attacking the rule of law. And I had a second point, which has gone out of my head because I have not had enough coffee. We'll stay with attacking the rule of law. There was another point I was going to make about watching, just thinking about what people are doing and the larger implications of it. It's not, well, this goes back to what I said in my comments. It's not just people standing in front of a courthouse throwing out words. The words that they're using matter, who they are matter, what they're trying to do with those words matters. And it's just kind of stunningly weird. And McGovern made the point, right? He says, and I didn't quote all of the words he said, you know, these people could be here actually doing their job rather than traveling to New York to stand in front of the courthouse and, you know, try and say that the trial is corrupt. You know, attacking the rule of law and attacking, this is what I was going to say, the government and national institutions, the credibility of courts, the credibility of whatever. We're seeing people try to damage public faith in things that have authority, like the rule of law. And as ever, if there's someone trying to undermine like the actual used properly rule of law and the systems that enable you to question the rule of law and see whether it's being done fairly or not, if you're trying to tear down the rule of law, you are trying to prop something else up in its place, and it's not going to be good.
All right, we have one more. This one also came from Dave. Dave's on fire today. Thoughts on the SCOTUS decision on South Carolina's gerrymandering case? It was political, not racial. Seems like the Supreme Court is happy to ignore the one person, one vote. What impact on democracy might that have? And then he also said, if we have time, your thoughts on Alito's flags, recusing himself, and the confidence Americans have or don't no longer have on SCOTUS. So that's two very big hot topics.
Wow.
Those could be two episodes right there. That could be next week and the following week.
Actually, faith in government and the Supreme Court might be an interesting topic, but we'll go back to the first question.
The first one was asking about the gerrymandering case. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Republicans, I guess, letting them keep the map the way it was.
Right. Where a lower court said, no, it actually is very obviously racist. Right.
Yep.
It's racial gerrymandering to give Black voters less power. And the Supreme Court said, no, it isn't.
Nope, they can do it.
Which in a sense isn't surprising. I think, if I remember correctly, and I didn't read it for this episode, but I think some of the justices who didn't agree with that said, among other things, that process of deciding congressional election maps should be happening on a state level and not on the national level. But I don't know I can't go beyond that because I didn't read the specific words. But yeah, that's that. Racial gerrymandering is one of the main reasons why there is gerrymandering in, let's say, the 20th century, for sure, probably earlier, 21st century. And, you know, I spoke a little bit about, but when I spoke to the House staffers like a week ago, I was talking about gerrymandering. And I was talking about the history of gerrymandering and the simple fact that it was considered corrupt from the beginning, and the idea was to obviously benefit you and your friends and cast out anybody else. Obviously, that's what's being done here, except initially it was about parties, and now, more often than not, it's about race. And it's blatant, and it's been blatantly going on for a long time. And again, particularly in the South, and there are things like the Voting Rights Act that were often useful in cases like this, and we've been seeing the dismantling of that kind of protection too. So this is a huge, huge issue. Oh, and the flags. Okay, I'll say
The
something
flag
very,
will
very brief about the flags because I know we're going to run out of time. Okay, so in one sense, I will tie Alito and the two flags into what I've been saying today. That a Supreme Court justice flying a flag upside down or flying a flag with certain symbols on it, kind of like words coming from a Supreme Court justice, right? It's a statement. If you're in the Supreme Court, particularly where you're supposed to be suggesting at least that you're thinking about the general good in some way, it could be a partisan version of the general good, but still, you have to think about everything you do, and you have to think about everywhere you go, and you have to think about things in a way that others don't. Some members of this court have not been doing that in some extreme ways in the recent past. But this idea of these, not just one, but two flags, seemingly making a statement supporting a coup against the government. And again, there will be investigation. I'm not going to draw absolute conclusions, but if you're a Supreme Court justice, you know you're not supposed to do that. And if you do it, it speaks loudly. It's the equivalent of words. It's been out there. He can never do it again, but it's kind of clear who he is. I made this point online yesterday. And I don't know, there are any number of things I could write about right now. But one of the points I made online, and we've talked about it here before, people are saying that he needs to be impeached. I would say, first of all, seems like a good idea, but even before you get to that point, at least have a hearing. The Democrats should at least have a hearing, right? And we've talked about hearings before, even if the conclusions are pointless. Having a hearing shows that a line has been crossed. A hearing is a statement. We think a line has been crossed. Now, there might be absolutely no evidence that a line has been crossed, as in, like, let's impeach, President Biden. Yeah. Well, find some evidence. But still, if there's a hearing that says we don't think it's right with these flags and we want to understand it, and in this case, an actual act was done, the hearing can talk about what that means. The simple fact of the hearing, I think, has importance. And not doing anything also has importance. Again, in my book about congressional misbehavior, sometimes they would, and someone in the book even says it, a member of Congress explicitly, sometimes we have to call an investigation mostly to prove to the United States that we're watching what's going on and we're taking things under control. And if we don't, they're going to assume that neither one of those things is true. In this case, I don't know, seems like a hearing would be the minimum of what should happen right now.
We did it. We cleared the deck. We've got them all.
And it's exactly 11 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah, that almost never happens.
I know. Meanwhile, my condo owner friends are like throwing texts and I'm trying to ignore them in the corner of my screen. Okay. So let me explain what's going on now. So now we're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording, but we will still be here talking about whatever we want to talk about. And without a camera, we can be freer and easier than ever. Not that anything about us, I think, is particularly not free and easy, but still, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you beamed in through NCHE, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too, poof, will be in the after party. I, as ever, want to thank you folks for being here for these discussions, for acknowledging that they're significant in topic in coming here all by itself, but then for being here and taking part and asking good questions and thinking about the implications and proving the importance of history and all of the and the importance of community and all of the wonderful things that happen because we're here doing this. It's a model that I've said more than once should be followed by others. Groups getting together to, monitored, presided over by someone to talk about current political issues in what we do here in a calm way, in a community-minded way, but to ask real questions. It's important, and it's particularly important in any kind of democratic government. And I want to thank Annie and Jessica and John and Claire the Avocado for being here and making this possible. I want everyone to have good health for the coming week. And for those of you who need to leave, I will see you next week.
I don't know if you saw in the chat, Joanne, but Jessica and her husband are taking lunch to their kids. It's the last year that they'll have any kids at that elementary school. I just think and she made homemade brownies. So now, of course, I want a brownie. Thanks, Jessica. Now I'm going to want a brownie all day.
Oh, Annie, I am happy to bring you brownies next
Oh
time.
my gosh. I just think it's so
nice.
sweet.
That's so nice and melancholy, right?
Yeah, it's been a great community for our kids over the last 11 years. And so it's the least we could do. So my husband's making chicken tinga tacos and I made some brownies. So we're going to go love up some teachers, y'all.
Yep. Please, please. That's awesome.
Send them
All right.
our love and support too.
I
Have
will.
fun.
Bye-bye.